Hey guys, it's Mitch. How's it going? So a few videos back, we did the beginning of Peter David's run on X Factor with X Factor number 71, where he reinvented the old team with a bunch of characters that he had mostly had foisted upon him, and managed to make something, I think, a lot more interesting, really. You know, it's kind of a standard ragtag team of misfits, but he was able to find a good mix of misfits. After putting that one up, I got a few comments from guys saying, you should do X Factor number 87 at some point. That's my favorite issue of X Factor. And that, of course, is the one where all of X Factor gets psychiatric care after the events of the Executioner's song. So I went back and checked it out and, did a little reading online and figured out, this is probably most people's favorite issue of X Factor. At least as far as single issues go. You think about what constitutes a great single issue, usually it's something big that happens. And that usually didn't happen in the Peter David run on X Factor, where there was a single event that was definitive. It's kind of taken more as a whole. So then in that case, what you're looking for is a standalone issue, which there aren't a ton of in the Peter David run, but we are doing that here where, in the wake of the Executioner's song crossover, the government has decided that it's traumatic enough that the team needs to have psychiatric counseling. And we're going to go one by one through the team and kind of go over what's been troubling them lately, and theoretically, although really it's just an excuse to kind of delve into the psyche of each of the characters. And that's the thing that Peter David likes to do. It's easy, particularly in comics, to find writers who just like to, use a bunch of cliches, basically set up a bunch of cardboard cutouts, put them into situations and have them say the usual things people would say in those situations, either in comics or action movies or whatever. Peter David, on the other hand, likes getting in the heads of his characters, likes figuring out motivations, and figuring out what kind of hang-ups they might have, which is really what this one's about. So we might as well get into it. We can start with the cover here. This is not going to be at all representative of what's going on in the issue, which is kind of the point. It's a bit of a joke cover, really, as all of X Factor gets ready to battle their newest foe, who looks an awful lot like Professor X from the back. And we've got our new series penciler with Joe Quesada, which is a very different look from what we've had recently. I mean, Larry Stroman was the artist for a long time. And then after that, Jay Lee got a few issues during the crossover. And you think back, like before that, like Whilce Portacio. And now Joe Q. I mean, he's not exactly an unknown in comics at this time, but I think before this, mostly he's been working in Valiant. It's interesting that this is going to be the first thing that he's going to get a crack at Marvel. And of course, Joe Quesada's been drawing comics for a little while now, and has worked any kind of kinks out of his system long ago, and is already like fully ready to be a superstar. With his weird over-rendered style, this is right at home in 1993, and like how much he's interacting with the corner box and the title here, getting rain clawing through them. That's great stuff. I mean, they like doing that stuff around this time, where you just see if you can get the character standing in front of the title or the corner box, whichever. Maybe get a little bit of debris flying in front of it, something. But you don't usually get them tearing it up like that. That's pretty great. It does maybe, rely on the reader knowing which book that they're looking for. But they let the most important part, the big X, that'll usually do it. All right, so we're going to start things off with the Ren and Stimpy parody of Rain and Simpy. And I don't really plan on hitting any of the Peter David run around this. So we're going to kind of sum up a lot of things that Peter David's been setting up leading up to this, as well as a couple of plot lines that are going to branch off from this issue. So for one thing, this has been a common thing with Rain over the Peter David run, where we would get like a pun of her name thrown onto something else that's pop culture at the time. This one was apparently suggested by Peter David's daughter. I gotta say, Joe Quesada does a pretty good Ren and Stimpy. And we get the whole thing with the Happy Happy Joy Joy song getting translated into Mutant Angst. And then we transition to where Rain is telling all of this to the psychiatrist that's been appointed to them. Tells him how this isn't the first time she's had this dream. She's had, dreams before this about, like, Rain's world. And another one where there was Rain Man. And she's like, oh, what do my dreams mean? And it's like, well, your dreams mean that Peter David likes to use puns. And we're going very, very heavy with the number of panels here. I'd be curious to see what the scripting process looks like. I imagine that Peter David gives out full scripts. That he's not just giving you, like, a basic plot with a couple of key scenes. And he goes, okay, this is everything that has to be on page 3 of this comic. And here's some suggestions for panel constructions. If you think of something better, go ahead. But this is the way that the story's going to go. So you better come up with something that'll fit. And Joe Quesada went very heavy on the number of panels. We've got 11, assuming that we're not counting these as separate panels. And I saw it pointed out that Joe Quesada was kind of designing his pages in a way similar to what Larry Stroman would have done. which is interesting, and I can kind of see it, even if it is with this far more hyper-detailed style. But there's going to be much more focus on, like, these open panels, and, yeah, these small kind of moment-to-moment transitions, or even aspect-to-aspect. So the psychiatrist in question is going to suggest to Rain that, it sounds an awful lot like you're trying on different kind of personalities, that maybe you don't like your personality very much, that you don't have a sense of self, like that you're letting everything else influence you, which is all interesting and could be right, could be wrong. I think it's still closer to the mark that it's just Peter David likes using puns. Although the not having a sense of self, I think, will come back. And Rain is completely on board with this interpretation because basically anybody in any kind of position of authority, Rain is like, oh shit, yeah, you know what you're talking about. Which the psychiatrist kind of keys on and goes, you seem to have a lot of respect for authority figures. Why don't you tell me about a couple of authority figures in your life that you've known? And so she talks a little bit about Storm, she talks a bit about Professor X, and, just how horrible it was when he got injured. And then they circle back around to Havoc, which gets her getting real quiet all of a sudden. And yeah, we're getting like the big close-up here. Like this is a very Stroman-esque kind of page, I think, with the kind of design element background and no panel border. And it looks really nice, and he's going to do this a few more times. So she gets talking about Havoc, and and it starts getting like really personal where, it's as obvious that she's got, like other members on the team at the time are aware that she's got like a crush on Havoc, but it's a lot more than that in that she's like full on like Romeo and Juliet style, like fixating on him. And, up to this point, it hasn't really been explained. It will be in a couple of issues where we find, because Rain was part of the whole extinction agenda. So this is the spoilers part. If you never found out, what was the thing they were building up to with Rain and Havoc? Because they were building that up for a while. Like that got introduced in issue number 71, and it didn't really get explained until I think around issue number 89. Where it was revealed that when Rain was captured by the Genosian government and turned into a mutate, at the same time, Havoc was a magistrate, so higher caste. And the way Genosians would do things was they would basically encode the mutates to a specific magistrate. So seeing them as an ultimate authority figure and like the most important person in their life, essentially. And that's what they did with Rain and Havoc. So we're not finding that out just yet, although we are bringing it back up. I think it's been on the back burner for a few issues. And now Peter David's about to get ready to drop that particular bomb. So he wants to set Rain up by having her talk about how she feels about Alex. Another thing they don't mention here is the fact that since the Extinction Agenda, Rain has not been comfortable in her human form because she's still got that kind of mutate brainwashing thing going on. So she gets very subservient and docile. And, she doesn't really have a mind of her own. So that's why she's always been in this kind of half werewolf form since then. Which, I wasn't reading New Mutants before this, but even I was, I had read an issue or two, and I was like, I don't remember Rain looking like this. She was just like a regular girl. Why is she all werewolfy all the time now? And the reason is that when she's a bit more towards her animalistic side, she has more control, to an extent. She also gets a bit more wild. And Peter David had a thing going on that he was kind of building off of that too, that didn't get realized, where he's also got Rain kind of being hot for whatever guy comes near her, which didn't seem like it was going anywhere and ultimately didn't in the Peter David run. But the thing that he came up with was because she's in her kind of lupine form all the time now, or like a half lupine form, she's in heat. So she just gets kind of worked up whenever guys anywhere near her own age get near her. And yeah, so that got kind of cut short a couple of issues from now, in issue number 89 here, where there's a bit right before they tell her, they had another dream sequence in this issue where she gets branded by Alex and all this stuff. And she's going over that with Moira because she sees Moira as a mother figure. And they're about to tell her about how she's gene encoded to Havoc. So that's going to set off the whole thing. But this page here is her talking about how she can't stop thinking about men. And they're kind of walking through this neighborhood and all the dogs are fixating on Rain and getting they're very involved with her. And the implication was going to be this is her realizing, wait a minute, all these dogs, they know I'm in heat. And they turned it around. And, that's what the shocked expression is for. And editorial decided that wasn't something they wanted to put in a comic. So Peter David had to switch it up, where Moira's just oh, that's just how it is when you're a teenager. And we had kind of an awkward comparison where she's just I'm more like those dogs than I am like an actual girl. Meanwhile, there's no real reason for the dogs to be there. But, just an interesting little footnote. Anyway, several rabbit holes later. But yeah, this is going to wrap up the whole thing with Rain as the psychiatrist brings up her, since she has this thing with authority figures, we should talk about your original authority figure, which is the guy who raised her, Reverend Craig, who she does not have a good relationship with. I think that's summed up fairly well. And the psychiatrist wraps up by saying, this thing you've got with authority figures where you're constantly seeking their approval might be traced back to how your original authority figure didn't really want anything to do with you. And Rain pops back in again one more time to say, wow, because that's blowing her mind. And yeah, no, this is a great little sequence. And I think Rain kind of gets probably the most real estate in the entire comic, where she gets like the most pages. It's interesting because it was very clear that Peter David was setting something up with Rain from the beginning, but it felt like it was never getting there. Like, we're 16 issues later, and we still haven't really touched on anything to do with Rain's love life, other than that she's always kind of after somebody. And now it's finally kind of becoming apparent that Peter David has had plans for her and has quite a few going forward. So from there, we're going to cut to the highlight of the story, which is the Quicksilver meeting, where Quicksilver has kind of been a member of the team, but it doesn't feel like really. I mean, it doesn't help that he doesn't wear a team uniform. And he's always kind of arrogant and prickish and looking down on everybody on the team. And we're finally going to delve into why that is. And again, with these no panel border kind of panels, that would be right at home on a Larry Stroman page. Only like going very heavy on the shadow on this one, getting a little design element behind Pietro on this. Like, there's some really nice stuff going on here, where Joe Quesada's kind of playing around with what he can do on a comic page. And the big moment for Pietro, it's the T2 arcade game. That is a big moment. Is going to be when he explains his point of view, where he addresses the doctor and goes, okay, have you ever stood in line at a banking machine behind a person who didn't know how to use it? Or wanted to buy stamps at the post office and the fellow in front of you wants to know every single way he can ship his package to Istanbul? Or gotten some counter idiot at Burger King who can't comprehend Whopper no pickles? And the psychiatrist has to admit, well, yeah, I guess I have had that happen once or twice. And he's like, okay, well, how do you feel in those instances? And the psychiatrist has to admit, impatient, irritated, maybe even a little angry occasionally. And Pietro says, exactly, because your life is being slowed to a crawl by the inabilities or the inconvenient behavior of others. It's not a rational or considerate attitude to have, but you can't really help what your reaction is. Now, just imagine that everybody in the world is a counter idiot or can't work a cash machine or etc. You'd probably be irritable and obnoxious and condescending all the time, now wouldn't you? And this whole time, of course, he's been filling out this puzzle that the psychiatrist asked him to take a look at, and finishes up right there with a big old thap, and shown has been a picture of a snail the whole time. Oh, hey, it all tied in. And this was kind of a brilliant moment in this comic. I like this. For one thing, it completely defined the Quicksilver character. I don't think anybody tried to do Quicksilver any different from this going forward, really. Or at least everything going forward was built off this base. And you can argue this is how speedsters have been built for the large part since this, where they're usually impatient and irritable. And I think before this, that had been done from time to time, but it was usually in a little kids in the back seat, are we there yet kind of way. Whereas this just summed it up way more succinctly and precisely. So definitive moment there for that character. From there, we're going to move on to Polaris. And we start out, Polaris has just been sitting there staring at what turns out to be a dish of candy for the last 10 minutes. She won't talk, she won't engage, she doesn't want anything to do with this whole psychiatry shit. By the way, I did not realize when I was a kid that this was meant to be candy. I think we zoomed in a little bit too close. These look like bean bags or something to me. What we need is like a logo on the little wrappers. That might have helped. But yeah, no, I didn't understand that was what that was. And that does kind of tie into what Lorna's talking about, because the psychiatrist says, hey, I see the brace came off your jaw. That's cool anyway. And the first thing Lorna jumps to is, yeah, sure, it helped me lose weight. And they're referring to Lorna got her jaw broken by Cyber a few issues back. And that's really going to be kind of the focus of this sequence here, is that Lorna has difficulties with her self-image, which is like, okay, but that doesn't really necessarily feel like a Lorna thing. I mean, she does every once in a while refer to that, but it doesn't feel right for that character. And I think part of it is that it doesn't feel particularly personal to that character. It's a bit more general, this is what women have a problem with kind of problem. So she's going to leave because, the psychiatrist says, hey, if you don't want to be here, you can take off. It's like, okay. When she's going to leave, the psychiatrist is like, you don't really like me, do you? It's like, why would you say that? Well, I think it's pretty obvious. And I'm curious as to why. Lorna evades the question, and the psychiatrist is like, well, you're very intelligent. Usually people who are as bright as you are very aware of their shortcomings, which is a bit of a rough transition, but, we're going to take that. And then Lorna keys in on it and decides that he's talking about her weight again. And with that, Lorna just kind of flumps down and goes, shit, I swear I wasn't going to let you do that. And get into my head. And that should be really what they're keying in on, I feel like, because that's the main thing that Lorna's had to deal with up until now, is having been possessed by malice for I don't even know how long. I think it was like a couple of years. And I think that is what Peter David was going for, where she doesn't let people in emotionally anymore. She walls herself off. And maybe there's sort of an oblique link between that and her fixating on her flaws and, just automatically trying to repulse people by being too harsh. But I don't think it comes off particularly successfully in this bit. And we kind of end with psychiatrist saying, a smart woman like yourself might find it a little bit ironic that you command magnetism, yet you have difficulty feeling attractive and you have a tendency to repel people. Which is not the most sensitive thing he could say when, your patient starts crying. So naturally she smacks the Kleenex box out of his hand and then just storms out. But yeah, tons of tiny little panels in between. Like, we're doing a lot of moment-to-moment or aspect-to-aspect transitions. And if the scripts were given out by Peter David the way I think they were, which I think they probably were, then all of these little no dialogue moments, these are all Joe Quesada's invention, I think. I mean, it might be Peter David, it might not. But there's some great storytelling going on here where it gets very drawn out, where the whole conversation feels very awkward and stilted, but like in a way that it should. All right, from there, we're cutting to Guido. Actually, this is another kind of big moment that I think a lot of people would remember. This is an interesting one because Guido is probably the guy who has the least amount of backstory going into Peter David's takeover on this title. I think all we know about him at that point is that he's Lila Cheney's bodyguard, and he has a New York accent. Sometimes he acts a bit more highfalutin than at others, depending on who's writing him. So Peter David kind of has his work cut out for him a little bit with his character. So what he decides to do is just come up with his origin from whole cloth. So I think he goes with what is probably a pretty standard idea, which is to subvert expectations. Obviously, a big dude who's always been a big dude and was always confident and, was never in a situation where he had difficulty isn't particularly interesting. So what Peter David decides to do is he decides to start out Guido as just a tiny little nerdy kid. Always got good marks. All the teachers always liked him, but what he really wanted was to be able to fit in, and that wasn't something that came naturally to him. So he decided to try and be a class clown as well. And he says that helped a little bit, but, only a little. And he was still getting made fun of and tripped in the halls and all that kind of stuff. And what he really wanted was to get the attention of this one girl, Sheila McCann. That's it. Really wanted to impress her, but didn't have a clue how. So this is, probably a story that most people can relate to. Cool looking artwork here, like interesting decision to underlight Guido here. Great looking shadows. And you get all the light going through his hair here. So his weird little tuft in the front, casting all sorts of shadows over the top of his head. So one day after school, he's starting to walk home, and that Sheila girl walks by, and she throws him a wink, and it completely, throws his brain into revolt. And he's not thinking at all, his mouth just starts working. He's saying something, he can't remember what though. And then that bully kid comes up and socks him in the jaw. And, he comes to, he realizes they're all laughing, including Sheila, so she was in on this. And he just kind of snaps, jumps at the bully kid, which was not a good idea, particularly when he's got all his buddies around him. They all stomp the shit out of him. And that's when Guido's mutant power kicked in for the first time. And Guido's power is that he absorbs energy, but if he doesn't expend it right away, in some way, then it deforms his body. So in this case, he ended up with this gigantic, over-muscled, over-veined arm, which is an interesting way to get to where Guido is today. And the bullies kind of panic. They shove him out into the road. In oncoming traffic, he gets hit by a friggin' bus. And that deforms him even further. And he says that it took a few more impacts for him to figure out what exactly had happened. And it's just like, so just happened to stop around the point where he's symmetrical and, he's ridiculous looking, but it's still something that makes sense a bit in your brain. But, we had to get there somewhere. And the upside of this is that Guido is constantly in agony. And he doesn't let anybody know because then they'd pity him and he wouldn't be able to stand that. Which is an idea. The only thing is it's not something that they ever really touch on again. Guido's always still the class clown type, and no one else ever really understands that he's in this constant agony, so there's not much of a point in giving him that. Other than to give him, I suppose, some kind of depth, theoretically. But again, if you don't touch on it again, is it really there? I don't know, maybe it's just kind of like, make you think twice when you're reading about this guy, and it's like, oh my God, like, this guy, he's so annoying. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, he's like just writhing in pain underneath all that. It actually just makes you a little bit uncomfortable about the character. And that is a fantastic over-muscled arm, by the way. Like, particularly with the heavy shadows and everything. Even got like the shadows of the fingers casting onto other fingers. That's great looking stuff. And such great looking veins. This is something I should come back to next time I want to try and put veins on somebody. All right, now we're going to cut to Jaime Madrox. And Jaime Madrox is a character that Peter David didn't like when he first got stuck with him. I don't think Peter David really had an idea what to do with him, so he kind of stuck him with the class clown thing right off the bat. So he's got these two class clown characters. And it took him a while to figure out something else with Jaime. I don't think he really got it in his first stint on the X-Men title, because here he's only going to give Jaime 2 pages, whereas everyone else, I think, usually got at least 3. And he first tries to get the Doctor with a joy buzzer. Doctor sees it coming, calls him out on it, and then runs him through a little bit of word association. And Jaime doesn't do, what you would think of as standard responses. So you say black, he says Motown. You say up, he says and away. And the Doctor asks, are those the actual answers that came in to you in the moment? Or is that something that you manufactured to get a response out of me? And he's like, honestly, I don't even know, man. And the only real thing he's got going on is that he loves attention. That's pretty much all Peter David was able to come up with for him, based off of his origin, which is that when he was a kid, he was stuck on his farm with his parents, and his parents died when he was like 15, and he kept the farm going with him and his duplicates. And he did that for a few years until he had kind of like a mental break, and he turned into a supervillain for a little while. And then until eventually, Professor X took him in, sent him off to live with Moira for a few years and, get rehabilitated to the point where he could be like, a regular X-Man kind of guy. And he hadn't shown up a whole bunch in comics before the X Factor series. He was going to show up a whole lot after, though. Because Peter David decided he had figured something out, I guess, with the Jaime Madrox character, to the point where he decided he was going to be the leader when they rebooted the series later on. And it got to the point where Jaime was like the heart of the book. But anyway, the whole thing with his origin, where it's just him on this farm for years and years and years, with duplicates, but it's not the same thing. That's what the whole attention thing is, because it means just he's not alone if people are all paying attention to him. And it's like, okay, I guess that's kind of a thing. Then we get to Havoc, and that's a pretty good one, actually, because Havoc's whole deal is that he's the other Summers, right? And it's something they've touched on a little bit in X-Men, mostly on the sibling rivalry aspect. But I think this is the first time Alex has ever been thrust into a leadership role. And now that he's here, it kind of terrifies him, because he feels like everybody's judging him at all times, making sure he'll measure up. And we're talking about the other guys in the group. We're talking about Val. We're talking about Lorna, most of all. And we're also talking about guys like Professor X and Scott, who, kind of convinced him to take this role. And he feels like he's always being measured against Scott. And particularly now that they have similar roles on their, respective teams. And Scott's always the natural leader guy. He's the guy everybody looks up to and respects, unless you think of him as the guy who abandoned his family to go hang out with his dead girlfriend. And then not so much, maybe. But they don't really bring that up here. And I'm not sure if this comes back a lot for Havoc, where he's always in Scott's shadow. It should. Like Scott is one of the founding members of the Marvel Universe, really. Havoc, not so much. But it's a great touchstone for him, and a nice little personality trait that Peter David kind of keyed in for him. All right, so now we're ending up. He's been through every member of the team. He's making his notes, and Lorna comes back in. And Lorna is still hung up on the weight thing, which is, again, like, I don't know that that's really a Lorna thing. But sure, she still thinks that the psychiatrist was calling her fat. So now she's got this horrible 90s costume that she's going to show off to him. With the one-piece bikini that looks pretty similar to, like, Psylocke from X-Men #1. But yeah, sure. And the arm and the leg bands, and the thigh-high boots. The fact that it's metal is like the only thing that seems to be functional, because she's got the magnetism thing and she can use that as like a liquid metal thing. I don't know. It doesn't honestly make a ton of sense. But anyway, yeah, she reveals her outfit. She says, "So, what do you think?" He says, "You kicked my hormones into overdrive." And she says, "Exactly. Some psychiatrist." And slams the door on her way out. And yeah, this is something that feels off the mark as well. Like, this is not anything that Lorna would ever wear, I don't think, given the, what is it, like 16, 17 issues before this? Like, her in the X Factor uniform from X Factor number 71 was good. It was a good look. It suited her. Honestly, even if you put her in like her old costume, which they kind of would later on, or like a variation on her old costume, it doesn't feel quite as right as that, X Factor 71 costume. Possibly just because that's when I first started looking at her as like a character type character. But still, it feels more correct to me. And so now we're going to have a summing up as Val Cooper sits with the psychiatrist. And this has all been at Val Cooper's behest. She's used the PTSD aspect of the Executioner's saga to just kind of run her team through a psychiatrist and see, okay, what is wrong with this team? Because they all act like a bunch of fucking goofs. So the doctor has her run through her assessment of every single member of the team. And she gets every single one wrong. Like, opposite kind of wrong. Rain thinks she has a schoolgirl crush on Havoc, but that she's pretty much over it now. Lorna says she's emotionally available. Quicksilver says he's snotty and for no reason. Guido says he just cares about himself and gets a little on the nose and says a guy who's feeling no pain. And Jaime Madrox says, he's a loner. He doesn't really need people. And why would he? He has all those duplicates. And he's probably the most self-sufficient aside from Alex. And I was like, so what do you think about Alex? It's like, he's really growing into his position as leader. Totally out of his brother's shadow now. So yeah, doesn't understand her team even a little bit. So they wrap up, and she storms out of the office because the psychiatrist told her, they're completely normal, they're refreshingly human, and maybe you need to take awareness training. And at that point, Val gets abducted by a whole bunch of tentacle monsters and dragged off, which I don't know if that ever really led anywhere. I mean, I understand that she would turn kind of evil shortly after this and start fucking with the team when they're out on missions, but it still doesn't seem like it actually ended up anywhere where there was any kind of coherent plot. I mean, part of that is because Peter David wasn't on the book anymore, but we'll get to that in a minute. And then the psychiatrist walks out. It's not Professor X, of course, it's Doc Samson, because that's what Doc Samson is. He's a psychiatrist, even though he's often kind of billed as a scientist. And he walks out kind of singing the Mutant Angst song under his breath. And that's it for X Factor number 87. Yeah, no, that's just a great comic. No fighting, no bombast, but you get a very close-up look at each of your main characters and what Peter David's been doing with them for the last year and a half, how he's been building them. A couple of things you maybe had some suspicions about get confirmed. We get Guido's origin, which we didn't know at all before this. He was still just kind of a cartoon character. We get further into the thing with Rain and Alex, which is really going to be a focus for the next couple of issues. And and I guess we were going to set up whatever was going on with Val, but that got cut short because Peter David only got 2 more issues in this run, and then he called it quits because he'd just gotten through the Executioner's Song storyline. And he was going to get ready to start up a new one, I guess. I mean, that stands to reason. Only he was told not too long from now they were going to be doing the Fatal Attractions crossover. And he's like, okay, you know what? The hell with this. I'm kind of done. I can't set up any new storylines because a new crossover could happen at any moment. And, they would keep coming, of course. So yeah, he would do 2 more issues, and then Scott Lobdell would take over for a couple. That was where I tapped out. I don't need to read any more Scott Lobdell than I have to. Thanks very much. And then J.M. DeMatteis or DeMatteis or whatever would take over after that. And I think Joe Quesada stayed on for a little while, but, Joe Quesada couldn't stick around anywhere for too long because he can't produce comics on a monthly schedule. Not even close, I don't think. The fact that he was able to get the next few comics out is pretty impressive, although I'm not sure what kind of lead time he had. Again, probably a fair bit. But this is an impressive debut. And really getting close up with our characters, just kind of showing them in the one background, which is probably handy, if a little more boring for him. So we had to get a little bit creative with the page layouts. But, showing all sorts of ability with facial expressions, having some fun with the lighting, going with weird angles. It's still an impressive debut for Joe Quesada, if you're not familiar with him from the Valiant days at this point. So that'll do it for the Peter David X Factor run. I don't imagine we're going to go back to this at any point. Like I said, there's no single issue apart from this one that is really kind of worth going over by itself because they are usually part of a larger issue. So unless I'm going through something like the Executioner's Song, which, I got them all. I don't think I really want to do that, but, it's a possibility, I suppose. But yeah, that might be the last of this particular run at least. I could see doing an issue or 2 of his Incredible Hulk run. If you guys have any suggestions, we could always do that. But for this one anyway, that's going to do it. Thanks very much for watching. If you like this video, please hit the like button. It helps out with the algorithm. Hit subscribe if you want to see some more. And if you really want to help out, in the description, there's a link to my Patreon. And if you go subscribe there, that gives you access to everything I do. So all of the videos, all of the comics I've created, as well as some Patreon exclusive content. You can also follow me on Instagram and DM me there for commissions. Commissions are open. But yeah, that's going to do it. Thanks again for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.